And welcome back. Our guest tonight is Marc Morano of ClimateDepot.com. He joins us to speak about all things climate. Thanks for joining us, Marc.
Thank you very much.
All right, now I want to start with this article we have right here. We cover this in our news portion. This is from the Mail Online. Headline, The Great Green Con #1. And in this article, they have a graph that points out the various global temperatures at various points. And there's our viewers can see it on screen right there. There's a black line that shows the actual global temperatures as well as two different speculations. And then our viewers can see it right there. It goes on to a horrendous, almost hell on earth somewhat of an effect.
Yeah, it looks like a dragon's breath of fire glowing. And we're about to fall off the chart is what's happening. And there's actually a contingent of scientists around the world led by the Russian National Academy of Sciences and UK astrophysicists who are all predicting global cooling. And the US geologist named Dr. Don Easterbrook as well, up to 100 years of cooling based on Earth cycles, natural cycles, sun cycles. So the first thing that's happening is they have egg all over their face. We were told by Al Gore, by the United Nations, by global warming activists, that we had runaway global warming. We were told the planet had a fever. And now we're going on 15, 16 years by every major global temperature database. And we're talking the land-based measurements, the satellite-based measurements. This is an epic fail. The temperatures are flatlining. And I give the UK Daily Mail. You're not going to see an article like this in the LA Times or the New York Times or the Washington Post. But the UK and European papers are onto this. The German papers are on to what we're calling the Green Con now, the Climate Con. Der Spiegel in Germany is doing great journalism. What's wrong in America? Why can't we get the truth out in the mainstream media? It's not happening.
Why can't we get the truth out? I don't think they want it out, Marc. But going back to this article,
we wouldn't have a job if the mainstream media were doing their job. Right?
That's exactly right. Now, going back to this article, I see they had something mentioned back in 1977. That was when people were told about the scourge of global cooling. So how do we go from 1977, we're all going to freeze to death, till 2013, now we're all going to burn to death?
It's amazing. And they do it without any hint of satire. In the 1970s, we were literally told that it was man-made global cooling bringing on an ice age. It was our carbon-based, our coal plants emitting sulfur dioxide, which was dimming the sunlight, which was causing global dimming, which was blocking the sun, which was causing the planet to cool. They actually said droughts, extreme storms, and tornadoes, crop failure were all due to man-made global cooling. Fast forward 35 years, and they're blaming the exact same phenomena on man-made global warming. It is unabashed. It is absurd. And this is why we call it climate astrology. It's why we call it tabloid climatology. Whatever the cause of weather now, they're blaming it on us. And in the 70s, they did the exact same thing, except it was global cooling and a coming ice age then. And so what's happened is when you have 15, 16 years of no change in global temperatures, suddenly they don't talk about it. Now they say many bad things will happen. And guess what? Bad things happen all the time. So now they're jump to Australia if there's a heat wave. They jump to Africa if there's a drought. They jump to Asia if there's a flood. Every day they can claim there's more proof of our theory. But there's always extreme weather. There's always something going on. And the idea that this is tied to global warming is absurd and actually contrary to all the latest peer-reviewed scientific studies that show that droughts are declining in the United States. Droughts are showing no trend worldwide. Floods are showing no trend up to 127 years. The big tornadoes are down dramatically since the 1950s. We're going through a hurricane dearth of 7 or 8 years without a big F3 or larger, Category 3 or larger hurricane making a landfall, the longest period since 1900 in the U.S. So not only is extreme weather not getting worse, it's actually improved on almost every measure. But they can always say, well, we've had a worse drought in 2012 than we did the previous 5 years, and so it's getting worse. And if this keeps up, and they project all this silliness in the future, it's not science anymore. We have NASA's lead global warming scientist in 2009 predicted that Obama would only have 4 years left to save the planet. This was heralded in the UK Guardian. Well, guess what? NASA's lead scientist now joins the Mayan calendar as having failed for a doomsday of Earth.
Now, that's a good point, Marc. I know I'm cutting you off here, but the question in my mind is, how many people back in the day, you see back in the 1970s, said it's going to be global cooling, and now it's global warming, and now it's whatever. How many people have rode the train the whole way. They went from it was going to be this to it's going to be that. Do you know anybody in particular, any groups?
The name that would come up is Stephen Schneider. Now, Stephen Schneider died about 2 years ago, but he was a big proponent. He was featured in Leonard Nimoy's The Coming Ice Age in the 1970s. He was a Stanford University scientist. And Stephen Schneider predicted it was warning of the man-made global cooling ice age, and he later became a global warming alarmist in the late 1980s. It took him probably less than a decade to shift gears fully. And then NASA's James Hansen, a lot of his colleagues at NASA were involved in the original. I can't find a direct record of NASA's James Hansen, but some of his colleagues at NASA were directly involved in hyping the man-made global warming scare, as was our CIA, as was our National Academy of Science, as was the popular media, as was people like climatologist Reed Bryson. He's unique because Reed Bryson, he was from University of Wisconsin. He was a big man-made ice age alarmist, and then in the 1990s and in the 2000s, he became a global warming skeptic. So you have to respect him because he realized the error of the climatologist's ways in the 1970s by jumping on the bandwagon, and he became one of the most rational global warming skeptics, from the decade until he died. I think in 2008 he died. So there were many people that rode and are still riding this scare. And the main thing is, whether you're talking about any environmental scare, whether you're talking about overpopulation, whether you're talking about the Amazon rainforest deforestation scare, whether you're talking about the global cooling scare, all of their solutions were the same. It was always more central planning, more international bodies, more government control, more changes in our lifestyle, more intervention by government to take away our freedom, to take away our liberty, to take away our economic choices. This is what the solution always is, because the intellectual left, if you can call them intellectual, or the activist left, uses the environmental movement to advance the cause of statism and international bureaucracy expanding. And that's what they've always done. And they're riding global warming all the way to the end. They've tried a little bit at the UN Earth Summit, which I attended in last June in Rio de Janeiro. They tried to shift gears and make it about species extinction, but they just couldn't get any traction. They had hardly any nations attending. It was a big bust. So now, with Obama's reelection, with Hurricane Sandy, they've reactivated global warming without the actual global warming, because the temperatures are rising, into the extreme. It's called global weirding, in the words of the New York Times. That's what they call it now. It's global weirding. The weather is so weird. And it's just an insult, because A, the weather's not weird, B, the weather's always changing, and C, there's always extreme weather no matter where you go.
But it'll all go away if you just start paying your carbon taxes, right?
That's right. And that's the most absurd. We have Barbara Boxer, the chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, actually making multiple claims that we needed to pass a carbon tax or cap and trade in order to improve our weather. We have U.S. Senator from Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, saying she feels global warming when she flies in the form of turbulence on the airplane, because the storms are worse. She senses the storms are worse when she flies, and she's blaming it on global warming. We have President Obama, who's on record as saying, had we passed a climate bill in the U.S. Congress, we would have kept the Earth 4 or 5 degrees cooler for our children and grandchildren, let alone the fact his own EPA admitted the climate bill, not only would it not have impacted global temperatures, it wouldn't even have impacted global CO2 levels.
I think the temperature raise, according to Obama, is that he has all these drones dropping their hot ordnance everywhere. But I want to point something out to you, Mark. I guess you're the man to talk to about this. We went out to South by Southwest. You may have saw we had a big protest out there because they wouldn't let us hand out our InfoWars magazine anyway. I was out there, and some guy comes up to me when I'm with my camera, and he says, "Hey, man, I just came, and I just saw Al Gore, and it was great. It was powerful. It was this, and it was that." And I asked the guy, and I'm playing devil's advocate with him. So you think global warming is real? He's like, "Oh, yeah. We've had Hurricane Sandy, and we had the drought in Texas." And I say to him, this is what I say, "Sir, we've always had hurricanes and droughts and tornadoes." He's like, "Yeah," but then he switches his argument. It's this double thing. He's like, "Yeah, we have that, but then we have all this pollution and stuff." Like, things I do agree, we do have pollution, Mark. I'm not debating that aspect, but you're telling me because somebody throws away a half-eaten hamburger in Kentucky that causes a drought in Texas, that makes no sense to me.
And that's what they want you to believe. And you're right. When you start debating the science, and I went on with Bill Nye, the science guy, I went on with the Sierra Club president, on CNN's Piers Morgan, And I actually cite all the peer-reviewed studies in the journal Nature and the hydrological journals. And it's like they don't have a case. When you hear the actual science, even the global warming activists who do this can't skew the studies. They still show no trend or declining trends. They have no rebuttal. And then they'll actually come down to, well, then they shift over and they say, well, the models show and predictions are. When reality fails, they come up with a lot of scary predictions. And I credit Penn and Teller, the comedians, with this. They did an analysis in the 1970s when you had people like Paul Ehrlich warning of doom just 5-10 years into the future. Environmentalists learned from his mistakes. He predicted absolute calamity by 1980. The problem is he was alive and well and had egg all over his face because all his predictions failed. So what the global warming activists have learned, they now make predictions so far into the future that they guarantee they'll be long dead before they have to be embarrassed the way Paul Ehrlich, who's in his 80s now, has been embarrassed. So when you hear these scary predictions of, the new one out today, we're going to have a Katrina every other year, find out what year this calamity is alleged to be happening, and then find out the year of the person who's making the prediction, what year they were born. And you do a little math, and invariably they're long dead, and they don't have to be around. And they've learned that. So the environmental left has a learning curve, because most of their predictions now are 2080, 2100, when all this calamity is going to be raining down upon us. Because you have people like James Hansen, again, egg on their face. The UN in 1989 said we had 10 years to act to stop global warming, or it was too late. You know what? Let's take them up on it. That means it expired in 1999. Your tipping point, your Mayan calendar in the UN was 1999. The Mayan calendar by the NASA scientists was 2013. Let's accept it and call it what it is, and it's certainly not science. This is akin to the interpretations of Nostradamus at this point.
Exactly. And I remember growing up, it was always, California is going to be underwater. California is going to break off and flow into the sea.
Killer bees from Africa are on their way up. And apparently there are some bigger bees, but they always had people terrified that we were going to be die in a plague of bees from Africa. And there's always concerns about invasive species and stuff, but it's a fear. It's alarm. It's irrational. It gets a kernel of truth in science, and it just hypes fear in a way that's designed to turn sovereignty and our freedoms over to international bodies and over to collectivist governments. Exactly.
Now, I don't want to let you go without getting into this. You have a new article at climatedepot.com. What is that?
Yeah, this is breaking news. Breaking news. Last week, the New York Times, I'm sorry, I think it's Tom Friedman, but Paul Krugman of the New York Times announced that those who deny global warming may be punished in the afterlife for doing so. He called climate denial, in quotes, an almost inconceivable sin. So this is where we are. The New York Times now, on their website and in their newspapers, is promoting the idea that skeptics of global warming are condemned to hell. Well, the LA Times didn't want to be left out of this circus. So today in the LA Times, global warming activist and good friend of Al Gore, Bill McKibben, who's always a regular on late nights with David Letterman, showed up and said that white America is the problem, that white America has fallen short by voting for, quote, climate deniers, unquote. And so now we've got it segregated essentially. And so my website, Climate Depot, the message is simple. The global warming activist today on our Monday is white America is condemned to hell. That's the message. We're going to hell because we don't believe in global warming. It's an inconceivable sin, according to Tom Krugman of the New York Times, and it's led by white Americans who are the real problem here. This is the state of the global warming debate.
Yeah, I mean, it always deteriorates down to just racial things. Like I believe it was LA Times last week said, if you're a white Southern gun owner, especially if you have any type of religion, you're a terrorist. I mean, it's always about race, and now they have these white wristbands that white people are supposed to wear to remind them of their white privilege and whatever else, and they're supposed to just feel bad because of their skin tone. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, in fact, in 1990, I believe it was 1993, the Washington Post said at that time of the Christian Coalition, the Pat Robertson group, they were poor, uneducated, and easy to command. And then it turned out they were actually a lot of affluent, well-educated people that belonged. The Washington Post had issued a retraction. What I find ironic in bringing up Pat Robertson was roundly ridiculed by the left for holding live prayer sessions on TV, I think it was 1987, to try to prevent to pray for a hurricane wouldn't hit the East Coast. Mm-hmm. He was mocked, ridiculed, and the same intellectual left, again, if you will, are now openly claiming that our SUVs caused Hurricane Sandy, that acts of Congress, the United Nations, can legislate bad weather. So the question is, what's wackier? Someone praying that a hurricane doesn't hit the East Coast or praying a hurricane goes out to sea? Or people who actually think that Congress can control floods, droughts, hurricanes, and tornadoes and make them less bad? People who think that we can vote our way to turbulence-free airline flights. That's where we are today. This is just, it's insanity.
Exactly. Now, we're about out of time, so closing comments, Mark.
Well, right now, the sad news is that we defeated the carbon tax and the climate tax and the cap and trade in the U.S. Congress. We stopped the UN process. We stopped the U.S. from getting involved heavily in the climate treaty process. But President Obama is going to use a Nixon-era law and start regulating global warming. He's going to use the EPA and other measures behind the scenes, unelected bureaucracy. Most Americans won't even know what's going on, and he's going to quietly start shutting down our industries behind the scenes. That's what he's poised to do. And the question is, can the Republicans threaten to defund these agencies? I doubt it. Can the Republicans make a coherent case of why he shouldn't do this? I doubt it. Can President Obama get away with this without the public largely being aware? I think he can. And so we're in a situation where we won almost every single battle of this war, but the climate war, but we're about to lose the entire war. We've won every battle, but we're about to lose the whole war if this goes forward. And it's a very frustrating situation.
Mark Morano, climatedepot.com. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
And there he goes. Now, if you want to support this broadcast, stop by prisonplanet.tv and get yourself a 15-day free trial. You can go there and you can see the Alex Jones radio show, the nightly news show, the rants, the special reports. It's all there for you. Be sure to check that out, the 15-day free trial. And also, if you want to support us even more, you can stop by the InfoWars shop, pick up something on global warming or the climate change or whatever they're calling it this week. You can see it right there. Global warming, emerging science, and understanding. That's for $19.95 at the InfoWars shop. Well, that's it for the news. I'm Jakari Jackson, and we'll see you next time.